Good morning, everybody. So we're going to be reading chapter 14 today from Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. This village proved very interesting, as there are certain well-preserved records that translated appear to be conclusive evidence that John the Baptist resided in the village for about 5 years. We were afterwards to see the records and have them translated, which seemed to prove conclusively that he resided in this country for about 12 years. We were later on shown records that would seem to prove that John the Baptist sojourned with these people through Tibet, China, Persia, and India for about 20 years. In fact, we felt that we were about to follow the almost exact same route that he followed, that the records indicated left and preserved. These were of such interest that we returned to the different villages and made an extensive search, where we found, by comparing the data thus obtained, we could compile quite an accurate map of his travels while with these people. At times, these happenings were brought so vividly before us that we could imagine ourselves traveling over the same ground and taking the same route that John did so long ago. We stopped in this village 3 days. During these days, a wide vista of the past unfolded before me. I could see these teachings going back into the dim past to the very beginning, whence all came forth from the one source or substance, God. I could see the different offshoots of these teachings being put forth by individuals, each individual adding his concept, each thinking it was his, revealed to him by God, or by direct revelation from God to him alone. Each feeling that he had the only true message and that he was the only one to give his message to the world. In this way, the mortal concepts were mixed with that of the true revelation intended, and diversity and in harmony resulted. Then I could see these people, the masters, standing firmly on the rock of true spirituality, perceiving that man is truly immortal, sinless, deathless, unchanging, eternal, the image and likeness of God. It seemed to me that further research must prove that those great people have preserved and handed this truth down through the long ages in its unaltered state. They do not claim to have all there is to give, nor do they ask anyone to accept anything, unless they can prove the words themselves and do the work the masters do. They do not claim any authority save the actual works they do. After 3 days, I found that Emil and Jas were ready to return to the village where we had left my associates. Their mission to the village had been purely a healing one, and there was no doubt but that they could have made the trip to the temple and this village in far less time than it did take us. I was not able to make the trip as they could, so they made my way their way. We arrived at the village and found my associates waiting for us. Their search for the snowmen had come to naught. They had searched for 5 days, then had given up in disgust and were returning to the village when their attention was called to what seemed to be the form of a man outlined against the sky on a ridge about 1 mile distance. Before they could bring their field glasses to bear upon him, he had so far disappeared that they were able to obtain only a glimpse. This glimpse gave them the impression of an ape-like form covered with hair. They hurried to the place, but did not find any further evidence. Although they spent the remainder of that day searching the surrounding country, they could find no further evidence and gave up the search. After hearing my report, my associates wanted to return to the temple, but Emil said we would visit a similar one within the next few days, and they decided to forego the second trip. Quite a number of the people from the surrounding country had congregated at the village for healing, as couriers had gone out with the tidings of the rescue of the 4 who had been captured by the Snow Men. We stopped over the next day and attended the assembly and saw some remarkable cures. One woman, about 20 years of age, who had her feet frozen the previous winter, had them restored. We could actually see the flesh grow until they were normal, and she walked with perfect ease. 2 blind people had their sight restored. One of them, we were told, was born blind. There were a number of minor cases healed as well. All seemed profoundly impressed by the work. After the assembly, we asked Emil whether there were many converts. He said a great many were really helped, and in that way their interest was aroused. They would for a time become workers, but the greater part of them soon fell back into their old ways of living, as they found it would be too much exertion to take up the work in earnest. The people nearly all live an easy, carefree life, and there seems to be about 1% of those that profess to believe that are really in earnest. The rest depend entirely upon others to help them when they get into trouble. Right here is where a great deal of their trouble lies. The masters say they can assist everyone that really desires help, but they cannot actually do the work for anyone. They can tell others of the abundance in store for them, but to be actually one with and of the abundance, each individual must accept and prove it for himself by actually knowing and doing the works. So thus ends the reading of chapter 14. Let's see how long 15 is. A couple of pages, so I'm going to truck right along through 15. We left the village the next morning, and 2 of the villagers who seemed to have taken up the work accompanied us. The evening of the 3rd day, we came to a village about 12 miles from the one where I had been and had looked over the records regarding John the Baptist. I was very anxious to have my associates look over the records, so we decided to stay over, and Jas accompanied us to the village. After going over the records, my associates were deeply impressed, and we laid out a plan to map and follow out the travels as outlined in the records. That evening, the master, who was with the 4th party, spent the night with us. He also brought messages from the 1st and 3rd parties. He had been born and raised in that village. His forefathers had written the records, and they have been in the family from that time on. It was claimed that he was the 5th generation removed from the writer, and that not one of the family had experienced death. They had all taken their bodies with them and could return at any time. We asked if it would be too much trouble for the writer of the records to come and talk with us. He said that it would not, and we arranged for the interview that evening. We had been seated but a few moments when a man whom we judged to be about 35 appeared suddenly in the room. He was introduced to us, and all shook hands with him. We were all spellbound at his appearance, for we had imagined that he would be very old. He was above the medium height, with rugged features, but the kindliest face I had ever looked upon. There was strength of character back of every move. His whole being emanated a light that was beyond our power of comprehension. Before we were seated, Emil, Jas, and the 2 strangers clasped hands in the center of the room and stood in perfect silence for a few moments. Then all were seated, and the one who had appeared in the room so suddenly began by saying, "You have asked for this interview in order to get a better understanding of the documents that have been read and interpreted for you. I will say that these records were made and kept by me, and those referring to the great soul, John the Baptist, which seem to surprise you so greatly, are actual occurrences of the time he was with us here. These records show that he was a man of wide knowledge and wonderful intellect. He perceived that our teachings were true, but he apparently never came to the actual realization for. Had he done so, he would never have seen death. I have sat in this room and heard John and my father converse, and it was here that he received much of his teachings. It was here that Father passed on and took his body with him, and John beheld his passing. There are none of my family on father's or mother's side that have not taken their bodies with them in passing. This passing means the perfecting of the body spiritually until one becomes so conscious of the deep spiritual meaning of life, or God, that one sees life as God sees it. Then one is privileged to receive the highest teaching, and from this realm one is able to help all. We never descend from this realm, for those who have reached this perfect place never wished to descend. They know that life is all progress, a going forward. There is no turning back, and none wish to do so. All are reaching out to help those that are striving for more light, and the messages that we are continually sending out into the universe are being interpreted by God's children who are receptive in every part of the earth today. This is the prime object of reaching this realm or state of consciousness, for we are able to help all in some way. We can and do talk with and instruct those who are receptive and who raise their consciousness either through their own efforts or the assistance of another. Another cannot do the work for you, nor can another carry you along indefinitely. You must decide to do the work for yourself, then do it. Then you are free and self-reliant. When all come into the consciousness, as Jesus did, that the body is a spiritual body and indestructible, and they hold themselves in this consciousness, then we shall be able to communicate with all and give out the teachings we have received to a greater number. We are privileged to know that all can accomplish all that we have accomplished, and thereby solve every problem of life. And that which has been looked upon as difficult and mysterious will be found simple. I do not seem any different to you from any other man that you meet every day. Neither do I see any difference in you. We said, we thought we could see something far finer in him, and he answered, that is only the mortal as compared with the immortal of man. If you would only look for the God quality and not make any comparison, you would see every human being as you see me. Or, by looking for the Christ in every face, you would bring forth that Christ, or God quality, in all. We make no comparisons. We see only the Christ, or God quality, in all, at all times, and in that way we are out of your vision. We see perfection and have perfect vision, while you see imperfection or have imperfect vision. Until you are in contact with someone who is able to instruct you, until you can raise your consciousness where you can see and converse with us as you are now doing, our teaching seems only inspirational in nature. It is not inspiration when we are conversing or attempting to converse with one. This is only in the nature of instruction leading to the point where the true inspiration can be received. It is inspiration only when it comes direct from God, or you let God express through you. Then you are with us. The ideal image of the flower, in minutest detail, is within the seed and must expand, multiply, and unfold and be wrought into the perfect flower by hourly preparation. When this inner image is complete in minutest detail, the flower comes forth beautiful. Just so, God holds the ideal image of every child in mind, the perfect image through which he wishes to express. We can get out of this ideal way of expression we can get more out of this ideal way of expression than the flower does if we will but let God express through us in the ideal way that he has conceived for us. It is only when we take things into our own hands that the problems and difficulties begin. This is not for one or a few. This is for all. It has been shown us that we are not different from you. It is a difference in understanding, and that is all. All the different isms, cults, and creeds, all the different angles of all belief are all good, for they will eventually lead their follower to the realization that underneath all there is a deep factor of actuality that has been missed, a deep something that has not been contracted, or that they have failed to contact, that which rightly belongs to them, which they can and should rightly possess. We see it as this very thing that will eventually drive man to possess all. The very fact that man knows there is something to possess, which can be possessed, and which he has not, will goad him on until he has it. It is in this way that every step in advance is made in all things. The idea is first pressed out from God's into man's consciousness, and he sees there is something ahead of him if he will but go on. Here, man usually blunders and fails to recognize the source from which the idea came. He thinks that it came wholly from within himself. He gets away from God, and instead of letting God express through him the perfection that God sees for him, he goes on and expresses in his own way and brings forth imperfectly the thing which should be perfectly wrought or manifest. If he should but realize that every idea is a direct, perfect expression from God, and as soon as the idea comes to him, he would immediately make it his ideal to be expressed from God, then take his mortal hands off and let God express through him the perfect way, this ideal would come forth perfect. Here we must realize that God is above the mortal, and the mortal cannot help in any way. In this way, man would learn in a short time to express perfection. The one great thing man must learn is to get forever through and out of the psychic or mind forces and express directly from God. For all psychic forces are created wholly by man, and they are likely to mislead. Thus is the end of chapter 15. And right here at the very end, there's a few things over these two chapters that I think are really directly applicable to what we are experiencing right now on planet Earth. And the first one comes from chapter 14, as it talks about the times when we are inspired, that we are inspired by either divine, revelation, some programming, something of that nature, and then we kind of take up a call, or we take up a mission, take up a cause, but then fall back into our own ways after a short period of time. And what they say here is that he said a great many were really helped, and in that way their interest was aroused. They would for a time become workers, but the greater part of them soon fell back into their old ways of living, as they found it would be too much exertion to take up the work in earnest. And I remember a passage from a spiritual teacher named Ramtha talking about this very thing, and it was actually from these books. I have to correct myself. It's from these books. Later on in these books, in this series, Jesus will begin to talk with these sojourners, and he will tell them that the amount of exertion that the masters are talking about here in chapter 14 on one's own behalf in doing the work initially does seem daunting, or it seems like a lot. But Jesus tells them from his elevated perspective that it is really very small, the amount of exertion that one must put forth in order for the spiritual transformation to truly take place. So what does that look like in someone's life when they decide to take up the work and then either go through spiritual transformation or fall back into their own ways? I can give you a perfect personal anecdotal example, and it is, excuse me if I sneeze, the pollen content in Florida is out of this world right now. When I was, how old was I, around 24, 25, I moved to South America, and it was with the intent to fully take up this work, where I did for some time, but I did eventually fall back into my own ways. And whilst I was earnestly performing the work, there was a great many karmic balances that took place, because what I had done was I had accelerated my, you could say, growth process. And in growing, there are growing pains. Life is both pleasure and pain. And if you have inflicted pain on yourself, or if you have inflicted pain on others, that will you will eventually need to feel that pain. And that is the way that karma balances out the infliction of malcontent or injustice or physical bodily harm, even emotional bodily harm. So that right there, having lived through it, having experienced physical pain and emotional pain, because I inflicted that on other people, places, and things, is, I hope for you, a bit of a maybe warning type of a thing. I'm not exactly sure which word to use there, but if you do not want to experience bodily harm, pain, stuff of that nature, don't go about causing it. That is the simplest way that I can put it. Whether it's to others or whether it's to yourself, all things must be balanced out when one earnestly takes up the spiritual work and strives to be closer to the kingdom of God. That being said, your guardian angels will look after you. They have your back. They'll make sure that no matter what it is that you have to go through, it will be proportionate, okay? You won't have to, if you're earnest about taking up this work, you will experience pain. Let me just put that out there first and foremost, if that is in your karmic vortex to be satisfied. If you have been making a gradual recompense for these deeds or these actions that you may have taken in this life or in previous lives, over the course of a life things will be balanced out. But if you begin to take up the work in earnest, you will see the process become accelerated. So whilst I lived in South America, I became extremely sick. It was probably the sickest that I've ever been in my life, and that happened twice. I was bedridden for days, and it was incredibly painful. I completely totaled a rental car with a friend whilst we were about 3 hours away from our destination, and experienced a lot of bodily pain and harm that way. And the result of that incident was that the remainder of my finances was completely drained. There was my left knee, where I was running and up a flight of stairs, and one of the stairs was much taller than the other two, and I caught my foot on it, flew through the air, landed directly on my knee, and am quite certain that I did fracture my actual kneecap. It took me a good long while to recover from that. So one could look microscopically at these events as I wrecked the car, and that was karmic balance for not seeing the approaching turn sign and thus not turning fast enough or slowing down for the turn, not seeing that the step was taller than the others and thus catching my foot on it. And that is the kind of immediate moment by moment karmic balancing that takes place. But I truly do believe that these incidents were balances for other things that I'm currently unaware of, or in some cases, aware of. So I say that right there to encourage you not only to practice raising thy consciousness and being more loving, and I encourage you not to do it out of fear. Don't approach the work from a fear-based place. Approach it from an I am ready. I am truly ready to walk this path. I'm truly ready to make amends for any wrongdoings that I may or may not have done. And I am truly ready to get through that so that I may experience bliss and joy. And I will end that little piece by saying that if you doubt me that this is the process through transformation, then look no further than the caterpillar who transforms themselves into a butterfly. Nothing comes without pain. That is the message of Christ Jesus as well. His ascension was immediately preceded by extreme physical pain. This planet, this plane of consciousness, third density, is a plane that supports that type of a transformation, because the infinite consciousness that is God knows that it must squeeze. And those who are weak-willed and those who cannot or will not do it in this life, they will return, as the masters say, to their easygoing, relatively peaceful lives. Whether that's a mundane repetition or whatever the case may be. And those who are genuine about taking up the work, those who are of the Christ mind, will endure that intense, momentary period of trial and tribulation and come out the other side better for it. Nothing comes without pain on this plane. But I say that to encourage you to welcome it, because it's another form of energy. It's the same exact, once you have the high enough perspective, as love. That's all I'll say on that note right there. Folks, we are in an unprecedented time. Never before has every single person on the planet done relatively the same thing at the same time, i.e. self-quarantining themselves because of the threat of an invisible enemy. In this case, the Wuhan virus. The next little thing that I'll talk about here is right at the end of chapter 15, where he says that if he should but realize that every idea is a direct, perfect expression from God, and as soon as this idea comes to him, he would immediately make it his ideal to be expressed from God, then take his mortal hands off and let God express through him the perfect way, this idea would come forth perfect. Here we must realize that God is above the mortal, and the mortal cannot help in any way. In this way, man would learn in a short time to express perfection. The one great thing man must learn is to get forever through and out of the psychic or mind forces and express directly from God. For all psychic forces are created wholly by man, and they are likely to mislead. Here, what we are talking about is that your mind is both a transmitter and an antenna. That life is vibrational in nature, and that whilst you are sending out vibrations, you cannot receive vibrations. And whilst you are casting your own light through willpower, through trusting in your own strength alone, whilst doing this, you're likely to mislead. Yet, if we practice meditation, if we practice calming the mind, if we practice settling down and entering a receptive state, we can receive genuine inspiration from on high. When I say on high, I mean a faster, more subtle, moving frequency that is all around us at all times, that we can tap into and channel into this physical dimension. If you doubt me, turn on a radio, tune it to a specific station, hear what comes through, then change the channel and hear the new thing that comes through, independent and different from what you were previously listening to. This is the very nature of the mind. The mind is either an antenna, receiving, beautiful, divine, or ugly, fearful, vibratory communications, or it is an transmitter, putting out whatever it is that you are concocting in your mortal mind. We all do this. We all project. And whilst we are ignorant of the fact, we are going about trusting our own will, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is a part of life. Many people will live many lives before hearing the message that I'm sharing here today, that the Masters are sharing through me. And they will project, and they will trust in their own strength alone, and they will experience fear. For these are wise words from Gabrielle Bernstein. Actually, I think it comes from A Course in Miracles, where she got it from. And it says this: if you are fearful, it is the clearest indicator that you are trusting in your strength alone. Guys and gals, if you're experiencing fear during this time of the Wuhan virus, it is a clear indicator that you are trusting in your will and your strength alone. But if you practice receptivity, as I do, when I meditate throughout the day, you will know that everything is very good. This is what I was talking about yesterday. All things are working out exactly the way that they are supposed to. Right now, you, I, millions and billions of people around the world have sequestered themselves into their homes. And this is almost like a trial period. This is like the caterpillar sort of going into the cocoon. And whatever you emerge as on the other side of this will say a lot about how you live the rest of your life and what comes next for you in your walk of faith. It is us, you and I, who choose which vibratory frequency that we want to tune into, and thus where we go out of this timeout period, this cocooning period. We can come out the other side as sloth, as educated, as rested, as drunk, as peaceful, as better at anything that you choose to endeavor in. But the choice is entirely yours. Whatever you do with this time of isolation, whether it's to connect more with family and friends through long distance, or if you guys are all living in the same house via that mean, if it is to work on areas that you've been wanting to work on in your own personal life for some time, if it's to get caught up on books that you've been meaning to read, or whether it's to binge on Netflix 24/7, 365. Your choice is yours alone to make. But I guarantee you that if you sit quietly in meditation for some period of time each day, you will begin to receive divine communication that will guide you on which path forward will best serve your future self. Bear that in mind, everyone. Everything that we do here and now directly impacts our future self. And if you want to be the happiest, most prosperous, most abundant version of your future self, take the steps now to set that version of you up for success. Only you can do this, and you will be aided and guided beyond your wildest dreams if you choose to tap in to the higher spiritual forces at work in the universe. If you are fearful in this time, it's because you are trusting in your strength and your will alone. If you are happy, if you are calm, if you are content, if you are inspired, you are in spirit, and you will do wonderfully when this is all said and done, and many of you are doing wonderfully right now. And that is truly very good. Namaste. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and I wish you all the best.